Good. Perfect. Welcome to all of you. That's great. And welcome to those of you who are following us online and so on. I want to welcome you. So we're going to have a good session tonight. I think I'm going to go slow to help you to make your notes and so on. I know that some of you are tired, but let's leave aside the day, which can be difficult sometimes, and see what the Lord has for us in store anyway. So beautiful. Turn on your page 14. I forgot to write that down on the board right now. Page 14 out of 27 pages. So we're good. We're going there. And we come to the top of the page, basically number 3 today. I'm going to make a quick, concise review. So it's Arabic number 3, the covenant of death and Sheol that we talked last week. So before I pray, basically I can make a short review that you need to basically make notes, and you have made it. Isaiah in that segment talks about 2 covenants spoken of by Isaiah, the covenant with 2 devastations. One of Isaiah's day, which is a local devastation by the Assyrian people, and then another covenant of the future with a worldwide devastation, which is the covenant with the Antichrist. And now I'm going to give you a little bit more details and so on about these things. What I said also, before we move on in prayer, I said that the famous passage about the tongue and so on, with the gibberish of the baby type of thing, okay? It's recorded actually in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 14, 21. And I hope that I did not bring any confusion, but clarity only, concerning the famous speaking in tongue, which is a sign of unbelief. That's why basically Paul quotes that verse in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 14. He quotes the verse of last week to show that at the market in Israel in the time of Isaiah, they will end up having another language being spoken apart from Hebrew and Aramaic, which is the language of the Assyrian. So it's a sign of unbelief. So the church came to being with the gifts of the Spirit. The gifts of tongue is not meant to bring somebody to Christ. Otherwise, most likely, sometimes it does offend the people. But it's a sign given as a sign of rejecting the Messiah. A new entity came on the scene, which is the ecclesia, the church. And that's why we have the gifts of tongue, because it's a sign of unbelief, pointing the rejection of the Messiah by the Jewish people. Okay, so that brings a lot of clarity, and I told you last week that I do believe in the gift in tongues. It's a gift given today, which will last only for the church age. Okay, but it has to be a genuine language, and so on and so forth. So we discussed that last week, and so on. So this is the only thing that I wanted to do as a review. Now let's pray and move on in our studies together. Father God, I lift up the people in front of me to you, Lord. So early in the fall, when the sun will be lacking in a few days, in a few weeks and so on, already tired. I am asking you, dear Lord, to provide for the need that we have to have good sleep, courage, to be focused at the right place, not to lose our focus, and to keep our eyes away a little bit from this world system. It's been a lengthy 2 years for the last 2 years, with all the rules and regulations that we have to face, and the decisions that the people have to make, only to gain the right to go to the restaurant. So, dear Father, guide us and help us, Lord, not to lose hope in what's laying ahead for you, the beloved people. Help those, Lord, that are still standing in unbelief, not sustaining a relationship with you. And for those who do sustain a relationship with you, keep us warm, Father, and willing to receive the word of truth. It's time now, more than ever before, to make a wise usage of our time. The end is coming, and we ought to be thankful for this. We pray this, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. So when we take on your page, on your outline, in page 14, now we come to Arabic number 3, the covenant of death and Sheol, and visualize your passage 28, chapter 28, basically 14 to 22. Before I read this here, the first 13 verses that we have seen last week together were basically introductory. What we have seen together last week was an introduction of the section. Isaiah showed the basic root cause to make a decision to side with the covenant with Egypt against the Assyrian. Egypt are down south, Assyria is northeast type of thing. That's the bad decision to come up with the covenant with Egypt against the Assyrian. This is not the will of God. Basically, the rulers of Judah of that time, the rulers of Judah, the south, are like the rulers of the north, Israel, because they are characterized by drunkenness. You know that from last week. Having no sensible mind to make good choices and judgment. So it will bring about the Assyrian invasion against Judah eventually. That's the introduction basically of the whole section of chapters 28 to 35. Like I mentioned again tonight, Isaiah deals with two covenants causing two types of devastations. And now we will deal with the first covenant. Here is dealing with not the covenant with Egypt, because it serves as an introductory material. Good point, sister, that you'll look there. That's good. I always forget something, isn't it?
Turn that one off. I turned off the other one. Oh, there it is.
No, it's going to come back. It's going to come back there too, I guess. There was outlines, there was an update. I think it will come eventually. All right. Not dealing with Egypt, but the one with the Antichrist bringing about the worldwide devastation. And I'm glad that most of you did Revelation, because again, the study of the Old Testament prophets like this will solidify your view concerning these things. And will solidify your belief on those who preach about these things, that we're not getting these things from the vacuum cleaner, but they are out of the prophets of the Old Testament. So, make a note, in verses 14 to 23, Arabic number 3, he deals with the covenant of death and Sheol. It should appear. Beautiful. And then you do like this. Right on. That's good. Let's read slowly. I'm going to ask you to circle a few things together here. Okay, come with me. We read the whole thing and then I come back. Therefore, hear the word of Jehovah, O scoffers. Circle scoffers. Who rule this people who are in Jerusalem, because you have said, we have made a covenant with death. Circle death. And with Sheol we have made a pact. The overwhelming scourge, circle that, will not reach us when it passes by. For we have made falsehood our refuge, and we have concealed ourselves with deception. Therefore, says the Lord God, behold, I'm laying in Zion a stone, circle a stone, a tested stone, a costly cornerstone for the foundation firmly placed. He who believes in it will not be disturbed. I will make justice the measuring line, and righteousness the level. Then hail will sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters will overflow the secret place. Your covenant with death will be cancelled. Circle will be cancelled. And your pact with Sheol will not stand. When the overwhelming scourge passes through, then you become its trampling place. As often as it passes through, it will seize you. For morning after morning, it will pass through any time during the day or night, and it will be sheer terror to understand what it means. The bed is too short on which to stress out, and the blanket is too small to wrap oneself in. For Jehovah will rise up as Mount Perazim, circle Perazim. He will be stirred up as in the valley of Gibeon, circle the valley of Gibeon. To do his task, circle his unusual task. And to do his work, circle his extraordinary work. And now do not carry on as scoffers, or your fetters will be made stronger. And I have heard from the Lord God of hosts of decisive destruction, circle that, decisive destruction on all the earth. Okay? We move on with these things here. When you go to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, we have learned something. I'm going to take you there. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. If you want to go, I have only part of it here. I'm going to read the whole thing right now. 9:27, it says this. And he will make a firm covenant with the many, circle the many, for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. What I would like you to note, he will make a firm covenant with the many, circle many, for 1 week. For 1 week. So he's making a covenant with the many, not all the Jews together. Not all the Jews. And the covenant will last for 1/7, meaning 7 years. Okay, so I repeat, the covenant will be for 1/7, meaning 7 years. That's the covenant with the Antichrist. And the many, it's not all Jews together. Let's go back in Isaiah chapter 28, verses 14 and 15. Therefore hear the word of Jehovah, O scoffers, who rule this people who are in Jerusalem, because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we have made a pact, and the overwhelming scourge. I can stop right there. Therefore hear the word of Jehovah, O scoffers, so the many of Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 and the scoffer of Isaiah 28 verse 14 are one and the same people. That's how prophecy are exact. The many and the scoffers here are one and the same people. Okay? It is signed, it will be signed by those, the scoffers who will be ruling in Israel on these days. It will be signed, the covenant with the Antichrist, with those who will be ruling in Israel in these days. This is what you and I might see. We might not. The people will see, because that's what will start the Great Tribulation. They will scoff at any warning not to sign it. They will scoff at any warning not to sign this agreement. So once again, the many of Daniel 9:27 and the scoffers here are the same people. It's a covenant that did not happen yet and will happen only in the future that you will not see, because, like I said in our Revelation and prophecy classes, the signing of this covenant will ignite the Great Tribulation. In verse 15, you have the reason, basically the purpose of the covenant. Simply put, it's to gain security. Okay? It's to gain security. Because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we have made a pact. The overwhelming scourge will not reach us when it passes by. You see, security. Nothing will be against us. For we have made falsehood our refuge, and we have concealed ourselves with deception. The purpose of the Antichrist signing the covenant with the rulers of Israel on that day will be for the purpose of gaining security. I ask you to circle the overwhelming scourge here. And when the overwhelming scourge here, again, it's symbolism of a military invasion against the land. But it will affect us. It will affect them. But they believe it won't. And in verse 15, God basically said, you fools. This is not a heavenly covenant, but a covenant of death. This is not a heavenly covenant, but from hell. Not a covenant of life, but of death. Not a covenant from heaven, but a covenant from hell. Not a covenant of life, but a covenant of death. Let's read verse 16 as soon as you're ready. I'll let you finish your notes right now. And I'm going to read verse 16. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I'm laying in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a costly cornerstone for the foundation firmly placed. He who believes in it will not be disturbed. Circle, he who believes in it will not be disturbed. Like I said, the covenant based upon Daniel 9:27 is with many, but not all. And here, when he says, he that believes in it will not be disturbed, here, how do you call them? A segment will refuse to believe in that covenant. That's them that you call the remnant. There will be a segment of people. He will make a covenant with many, but not all. At that point, the remnant does not believe, but they will come to faith at the end of the Great Tribulation. Because eventually they will place their faith in the stone. Okay? They will place their faith in the stone, and their security will become in the stone. And the stone is the Messiah. They were not believers yet at the beginning, but they will have nothing to do with the covenant with the Antichrist. Okay? And the stone is the Messiah based upon the two scriptures that you have on the TV screens. Romans chapter 9 verse 33, correct, and 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 6. So that's why the important thing that I would like you to embrace It's chapter 9, verse 27 of a deep study that we have done together on Daniel. A covenant with many, not with all. Some will have nothing to do with it, and so on. Okay? Verses, that's those who believe will not trust in the covenant of shield. Okay? So while the many, the leaders, will enter into that covenant, there will be an element of the Jewish people, an element that will not. Vicky, can I ask you to read 9:27 one more time to look at the similarity between the two? Are you in Daniel? Yes. Go to Daniel 9:27 and read something before I read basically 17 and 18. Go for it. Daniel chapter 9 verse 27.
Okay. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction. One that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate.
Okay, you see, but in the middle of the week, look at verse 18. Your covenant with death will be canceled. So your covenant for security will be canceled. When? In the middle of 7 years. 3.5 years, there will be a broken of the covenant. And your pact with shield will not stand. It will make a stop to the sacrificial system. When the overwhelming scourges passes through, then you become its trampling place. The overwhelming scourge is the Great Tribulation and the campaign of Armageddon. Do you see the similarity between Isaiah and Daniel? Priceless to understand these things. Okay? So in verses 17 to 18, in verse 17, to go back for a moment, I will make justice the measuring line and righteousness the level. Then hail will sweep away the refuge of lies. Think about our governments today, where we are at here. So the truth will be revealed here, and coming out and revealing the nature of that covenant here. The waters will overflow the secret place here, meaning everything will come to light at that time, at the end of it. In verse 18, I read it. The covenant will be annulled. Then will come the military invasion against the land of Israel. So what they hope will not be happening will happen. They will sign a covenant with the Antichrist for a final secure land, and what they hope for that will not happen, being invaded again, will happen to them. Because it was a covenant of security for them. Okay? You see the lies, and all of these things are coming, and very, very few people are thinking and are talking about these things. You don't hear that on the news, of course, here, because our politicians at large are promising, global warming and all these things to make a better world here. But you and I know that it's not going to happen. Something might increase, might improve also, but all these things are destined to occur here. It's prophetic, and basically we have to believe that it will take place. In verses 19 to 20 of the passage, we're still laboring on Arabic number 3 of the passage. On verses 19 to 20, I need to point out a few things here. There will be 3 results of the covenant with shield. This is incomplete, I will speak. So 1, 2, 3, I will give you some details in between. there will be three results of having signed the covenant with shield. Instead of security, insecurity, 19 and 20. As often as it passes through, it will seize you. From morning after morning, it will pass through, anytime during the day or night. And it will be sheer terror, circle terror, far from secure, to understand what it means. The bed is too short on which to stretch out, and the blanket is too small to wrap oneself in. All of you went camping sometimes with a sleeping bag that is too small for you, and it's very not comfortable. So simply put, instead of security, invasion. Gentile armies. In verse 19, instead of security, invasions. Still under point number 1 here, in verse 20, instead of rest and comfort, unrest. The bed is too short and the blanket is too short. Okay? Instead of its unrest, instead of lack of complete comfort, and that complete comfort can only be brought by the Messiah. Number 2, 21 to 22 can be entitled The Wrath of God. It's right there. For the Lord will rise up at Mount Perazim, he will be stirred up as in the valley of Gibeon, to do his task, his unusual task, and to do his work, his extraordinary work. And now do not carry on as scoffers, or your fetters will be made stronger. And I have heard from the Lord God of hosts of decisive destruction on all the earth. The reason why he put Mount Perazim, it's where David defeated the Philistines. Mount Perazim is the place where David defeated the Philistines. Showing his wrath, it's going to be even worse. And you have the scriptures reference for you to read on it. That's where David defeated the Philistines. When he goes with the valley of Gibeon, two things happen in that valley as an example. David defeated the Philistines once again. You have the scriptures on the screen, 1 Chronicles chapter 14, verses 13 to 16. And in the valley of Gibeon also, Joshua of the book of Joshua defeated at that place the Canaanites. Decisive judgment, so that's why these two namings. Mount Perazim, David defeated the Philistines. In the valley of Gibeon, two things happened there. David defeated the Philistines again, later again. And in Joshua, in the time of Joshua, which is before David, basically, Joshua defeated the Canaanites at that place to show the severity of what will be happening over the earth. What is kind of interesting for you and I, we find in these two verses, 21 and 22, and 21 only, two titles of the Great Tribulation. When we did Revelation together, I gave you many names for the Great Tribulation, and in Isaiah, these two came out. And it's called basically his unusual task and his extraordinary work. How do you know, Francois, that this is a reference to the Great Tribulation? It's not difficult. Read verse 22. It's not the destruction of the land of Judah. It's the destruction of the whole earth. I don't know.
It's my phone.
Okay, she's on vibration, that's it. Okay, why these names? It's a very unusual task that he will do, and it's an extraordinary work when he will send the 7 bowls, the 7 trumpets to go backward, and the 7 seal judgment that will destroy the surface of the planet here. That's why it's labeled as being his unusual task. I carry on. So as a result of making a covenant back in 14:15, verses 14 and 15, making the covenant with Sheol, as in Daniel 27, a decree is passed on from the throne of God. A decree is passed on from the throne of God. And the decree, it's the distortion and the destruction of the surface of the globe by means of the Great Tribulation. And this is a reference also to the 7 seals of Revelation chapter 4 and 5. This is the accomplishment or the fulfillment of the 7 seals of Revelation chapters 4 and 5. I don't need to teach that again. You very well know. Do you remember when I teach Revelation, I talk about the 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowl judgment, and I always say the same thing. It goes from mild to heavy. So by the time that the Great Tribulation will be ending here, the planet will be in total chaos. That's why it's going to stand in need to be reshaped for the 1,000-year kingdom. It will be so heavy, like I told you in the past, that the highest peak on earth will no longer be Everest, but the Holy Land, and the land here of Israel will basically come into the Mediterranean Sea as well. Okay? This is important to make a note based upon Isaiah right now, because you might be wondering how come he teaches that this is not the rapture that ignites the Great Trib here. The Great Tribulation will start with the signing of this covenant. Okay? Once they sign that covenant, it's day 1. Lots of Christians believe that after the rapture right away, then comes the Great Tribulation, but not about the teaching, not according to the teaching of Daniel and Isaiah. He will make a firm covenant with the many, and when he makes that firm covenant, the Great Tribulation will start for a week, 7 years. Are you with me? Because in Daniel chapter 9 verse 27, he will make a firm covenant for 1 week, and it will be broken in the middle of the week. We have studied it all in the book of Revelation. The abomination of desolation in the middle, from bad to worse. All right? That's why it reinforces my statement that I say sometimes, that to understand the book of Revelation, it's necessary to have studied the Old Testament and to understand what the prophet says about these things and so on. All right, I'm done with point number 3. I'm done with point number 3 right now. Let's take the explanatory parables here. As I slow down, because when you read it, you don't understand this language, but now my prayer with my eyes open right now is that you may understand where we go with all this. Explanatory parables. So you don't have parables only in the New Testament. They go from 23 to 29. Here we're going to go somewhat verse by verse here. The explanatory parables. We'll take our time. Verse 23. Give ear and hear my voice. Listen and hear my words. In verse 23, it's a call to learn. It's a call to give heed and learn. He wants them to learn because he will give them two parables. And the two parables will be there to show the necessity. To show the necessity of these judgments. You know the question of why so good of a God would allow these things to happen, so on and so forth. He will basically give two parables as to why the severity of these judgments, of the destruction of the earth, in a sense, is necessary.
When he says, give ear and hear my voice, is it Isaiah talking or the Lord?
Both, basically. It's Isaiah that says here, but that's the word of God. Okay? Isaiah wants them to listen to him, but what he's receiving is from God. Okay? But these parables on the other side of the coin will show also why the judgment will show the reason as to, this parable will also show why the judgment will be tempered by mercy. You see, you have good and bad. Yes, he will destroy. Be with me. Be with me for a second. Yes, it's going to be very severe. I'm giving you clues in advance right now. Yes, it will be very severe for the Jews during the Great Tribulation. But what will be the end result? The end result of the Great Trib will be the national regeneration of the people of Israel. So these judgments are necessary to show God's mercy. Delicious. These judgments are necessary to show God's mercy also. Because we know that something very bad will be happening, but it's a very happy ending. What's the happy ending? And they will shall look unto me whom they have pierced, and they will say, come, let us return to the Lord. And bang, he comes back. Good news. Okay? He will use the parallel in these parables of a plowman. The plowman's treatment, the one that does the plowing, treatment of the land or of the soil. A plowman's treatment of the land, of the soil or the soil, and he will relate that to God's wisdom in dealing with Israel. I will give you the words that goes with it after the pause. Okay, he will use the plowman. Who has a garden here? In your backyard, you have a garden and you need to plow the soil type of thing. And it's a hard thing to receive for the soil. When you go behind the bulls and so on, and you with the plow and you reverse the land and so on. So you will use that picture to show God's wisdom in dealings with Israel. So now the parable will become a little bit more alive for you after the break.